Since Stan Lee passed away, I have been brainstorming different ways in which I could do a follow-up video in which I highlighted the impact that his passing had on the comic book industry. And over the last several weeks, I brainstormed several different ideas and several different ways in which I could potentially do this video. And I didn't really like any of them, to be honest with you. And just a few days ago, a subscriber to this channel by the name of John reached out to me with an analysis that he performed looking at the volume of items associated with Stan Lee's passing that had been sold on eBay. And what he did was he looked at a 2-week period before his passing and a 2-week period after his passing. And he looked at the daily volume of items that were being sold on eBay, and he looked at that volume hour by hour. Now, this was, in my opinion, a very in-depth analysis that John had performed, and I have a feeling that he spent a considerable amount of time doing this breakdown. And so, John, if you're watching, I will say thank you for doing this analysis, for sending it over to me for my opinion, and ultimately for allowing me to take that data and to turn it into a video. I am very thankful for that opportunity because, as I mentioned, I was brainstorming ways to do a video of this sort. So I'm very thankful that you've given me the opportunity to create this video for myself, but then also for the folks that are watching this video, because I think that there are some things that we can all learn from these data. Now, what's important here is that John and I are not saying that the people that sold items associated with Stan Lee are bad people, nor are we saying the people that bought items associated with Stan Lee are bad people. What we are saying, however, is that Stan's passing had a major impact on the industry, and we want to better understand that impact. And I think that whether you are a buyer or you're a seller, there are some things that can be learned here. And so I think that that's the best way to look at these data, is with an open mind, through the lens of being a buyer or a seller, or for that matter, just someone that, liked Stan Lee. And so I would say, as you look at this video, just kind of keep that in mind, that we are doing this for the purpose of better understanding the impact. The first thing that I want to do is to talk about the methodology that was used for this analysis. Then we're actually going to look at the data. And we're going to look at the data two ways. We're first going to look at it day by day, and then we're going to look at it hour by hour. And then the very last thing that we're going to do is to actually look at some of the items that were sold on the day that Stan passed, as a way of providing some context and some texture to the numbers that we would have seen over the course of this video. So when we're talking about the methodology, I want to talk about what's in and what's out. So the first thing that was looked at was, again, the 2-week period before his passing and the 2-week period after. We, and by we, I mean John, only looked at eBay sales. So nothing from Heritage or Comic Link, nothing from Instagram, or no, of course, personal sales were captured. Only eBay sales were captured. And the way that he identified those items to include in the analysis was he basically searched Stan Lee signed on eBay. And anything that came up associated with Stan Lee signed was included in the analysis. So this pulled into the data comic books, statues, toys, figurines, pictures, and all other kinds of memorabilia were all included in the analysis. So as you look at the data, as you look at the numbers, kind of keep that in mind, that it is all inclusive and it's not just comics per se. So with that, let's go ahead and look at the data. This content is sponsored by BCW Supplies. Visit them at bcwsupplies.com for accessories to protect, store, and display your collectibles. So the first data that we're going to look at is essentially a volume analysis in which we look at the total number of items sold on a daily basis. And you can see on the left-hand side the individual days from 10:30 all the way down to 11:26. And then you can also see the items that were sold. The data on the left is essentially graphed on the right-hand side. So we'll kind of focus our attention for the most part on the graph on the right. But what you can see when looking at the graph on the right is that you can see relatively low volume on the left side of that chart. You can see as you go from 10:30 all the way down to 11:10, there is roughly a 25 item average, right? So on average, any given day, there is roughly 25 items that are sold that have been signed by Stan Lee, at least on eBay. And then you see a slight uptick on 11/11. There's a slight uptick where that average goes from basically 25 up to 100 items that were sold on that day. And you'll actually see this illustrated better on the next data set that we'll look at. But there is a massive spike as you go from 11/11/18 to 11/12/18 to the tune of almost 2,300 items that are sold on a single day associated with Stan Lee. And then those numbers kind of drop off rather precipitously on 11/13 down to 640 items. And then there's a little bit of a trail off. But even as you look to the right side of the chart, as you look from 11/14 all the way out to 11/26, you can still see that the average daily volume of items sold is still higher than the passing period of Stan Lee. And so just some interesting things to see here. Again, from a buyer or seller perspective, there are some things that can be learned from this data set. We just finished looking at the day-by-day volume for sales, and we wanted to go a little bit deeper into the data. So in this data set, we are going to look at hour by hour sales volume. And this chart is definitely an eye chart. So let me first orient you to what it is that you're looking at. Down the left-hand column are the individual hours. Across the top are the days of the week that we're looking at, right? So the time horizon that we're looking at starting from 10/29 all the way to 11/26, which matches the previous data that we just looked at. Down at the bottom in the green are essentially the daily volume totals. And again, this matches the previous data set. In between the top orange bar and the bottom green bar essentially is the hour by hour volume for those days. Now, there's some interesting things that are happening in this data, and I want to call your attention to just 3 of those things. The first thing that I want to highlight is in yellow. And if you look at 11/11, starting about 5 o'clock, running until about 8 o'clock on that same day, you will see a noticeable uptick in sales. This is a 3-hour time block where there was essentially 71 items that were sold on eBay. Now, if you look at the sales prior to 11/11, as we mentioned before, your average is roughly 25. 25 items were sold daily in the 2 weeks prior to. But on this particular day, 100 items were sold, and 71 of those items were sold within a 3-hour period. And what we don't know is how many sellers, how many individual sellers there were that happened to be selling those 71 items. Now, as you look at 11/12 and you look at the block that is highlighted in red, that is essentially the hour in which Stan Lee actually passed away. And in that hour, there were 42 sales that happened. Very few sales the morning of, as you see on the chart. There was in fact 1. But in the hour of his passing, there were 42 sales. And there was definitely an uptick, a noticeable uptick starting around 10:42 a.m. And as you look at the next time block, starting at 11 and finishing at 12 noon, you'll see that there were 915 items sold. And as you look at the next 451, 212, 145, etc., totaling by the end of that day, 2,266 items had been sold on eBay. And as you look across the green bar on the very bottom, you see that volume that we spoke about before. On 11/13, 640 items, 11/14, 192, so on and so on. So the next data point that I want to highlight is actually on 11/15 at 3 a.m. in the morning. So from 3 to 4 a.m., there were essentially 0 sales. Now, why is that significant? It's significant because it was basically the first time since Stan Lee's passing that there were 0 items that were actually sold that had been signed by him. I don't think that there's really anything more significant to it other than that, and so we again wanted to kind of point it out here. Now, I have a feeling that if we spent more time looking at this data, massaging this data, I'm pretty sure we would identify some other patterns to it. But for the purpose of this video, we just wanted to kind of present the data, to highlight a couple of things that we noticed about the data. And so if you see, as you're staring at this graph, if you see other interesting data points, by all means, enter those comments into the comment section and let's have a conversation about what you're seeing. So what I wanted to do in this last section was to highlight some of the items that were actually being sold on November 12th. And so I jumped on eBay, I went back in time, and I kind of identified some of those items. And you can see that the vast majority of these items were indeed comics, but there were also toys and photos and other types of memorabilia that were being signed and that had been signed and were being sold on eBay at the time. But again, this provides a little bit of texture, a little bit of context for the types of items that were being sold and also for the dollar amounts that these items were selling for. And you probably noticed that, yes, some of these items were being sold in the United States, but some of them were also being sold in Canada as well. So there you have it. That wraps up the analysis that was performed. As you wrap your mind around these data, if you are seeing something in the data that wasn't highlighted in this video, by all means, please enter those thoughts into the comment section. As always, I want to thank you guys for taking the time to watch this video. I hope that you enjoyed it. Be sure to visit BCW Supplies to learn about their more than 950 plus products for collectors. Products include card sleeves, display cases, comic bags, storage boxes, and gaming folders, just to name a few items. Head over to BCW Supplies today for more information.